In this video demonstration, we're going to take a look at the Gluware Ansible integration that leverages the Gluware published RESTful API we call Glue API. This feature was first introduced with Gluware version 3.6 and it's now been updated for 3.7, although the Ansible integration is kind of separate from the Gluware release train. So oftentimes when Gluware engages with a customer, they have made some investment of time and effort into using Ansible playbooks because they're open source and available, and sometimes you go down that path because a vendor has taken you down that path or for other reasons. So some of the challenges that they've expressed to us when they've done this is Ansible requires an inventory to be defined, and generally it's a static file that's defined along with the YAML playbook. And so that inventory file must be maintained when you're rerunning your playbook. So that's a challenge. Second is when you automate network configuration features with Ansible and you're making a change, you don't have real visibility of the state before the change, the state after the change. You know the playbook executed, but you really don't have good record of exactly what the state was before and after to kind of monitor and measure the drift or the change in that config. And along with that, you don't really have the ability directly when you're using modules for config changes to audit or identify the condition it's in before, or audit to verify a change after a potential successful config change that may bring a device back into policy. So what we're going to highlight in this demonstration is the Ansible plugin for inventory, where Gluware maintains the inventory file dynamically, along with that ability for Gluware to feed attributes or variables like an NTP server, IP, or anything you may need to feed into Ansible for the module for config management. Next is we're going to highlight the Ansible module that Gluware has published that allow you to trigger config drift for monitoring what config has changed and config audit. So let's get on with the demo.
And I have just a list of 2 iOS devices and 5 NOx switches. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, so my setup that I have here, I'm using my Windows box, and I'm using Cygwin where I have Ansible installed. So I have Ansible, I have Python 3.6 installed, and I have some modules from Ansible also installed, and I have my inventory plugin already installed. I've already done the pip install. And I'm going to use VS Code today, or Visual Studio Code, to show you the files and how everything interacts. So the first thing you need to know when you set up, when you're working with Ansible, you need usually an Ansible config file. And I'm working from my test Ansible directory, and I have this config file set up, and it points to my this Gluware devices YAML file as my inventory. And it's also a file that lives in this directory. And this is how I marry up my Ansible system through the inventory plugin to the Gluware system that I'm connected to. I'm at this particular IP address, and I'm using this username and password. I have it set up in my, I've created that username and password inside of my control system, and I said, you have access to these particular devices. And this is just allowing me to have a cert location. This part of the setup allows me to map variables that we have inside of Gluware to variables I want to use inside of Ansible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a demo of a particular playbook that I have that shows you the information that I have on my devices. And it's just, I call it display facts. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here, and go ahead and run it. And while it's running, I'm going to show you what the code does. So this is the playbook itself, and the playbook's running right here in the background. And it has 3 tasks. And I'm running on all of the hosts that I have currently set up in that particular organization I showed you inside of Gluware. And the first task is to gather the facts. And since I've asked Ansible Playbook to give me all of the hosts, I need to narrow down for this particular task. Since I'm running the iOS facts module, I only want to see the ones for iOS. So I'm using the standard Ansible Network OS to the iOS. With the iOS command, and it's only gathering the facts for the iOS switch. And you can see back here it's skipped over my NOx switches because those don't match that criteria. Now it's gone on to the next task, which is this task here, where gather the NOx facts. And again, I have this task here, and I'm using the NOx module. And the last task is to display the information about the facts. And this gives me a quick little demonstration of how we can access the attributes. And this is, if you're used to using Ansible, then this is just the Ninja 2 templating modes where you can just display something. From the facts, I was able to gather the Ansible network host name, the Ansible version name. This serial number here came from the inventory plugin through our inventory plugin in Gluware. If I go back to Gluware and I look, I have a serial number column here. And this serial number column is the information for that particular host that popped up in my playbook. So let me bring these back up.
And just to wrap that around is how is Ansible able to talk to Gluware? We have a published API. So John wrote the plugin that is leveraging our published API to make a programmatic call to Gluware to interact with that information.
Okay, so, and the last thing I want to show is I have a custom attribute that I added inside of Gluware, and I was able to also use that in my Ansible plugin to get some information that I wanted to assign, which I'm going to use in my next examples, which is the NTP server I wanted to have for each of my hosts. So I call it NTP server spec, and again, that's this particular column over here, and I can edit this spec. I can edit the attribute of it. I can change its number, I can change what it is and save it, and it would be associated to that device. And then I can use that in my further playbooks. So I see I'm running a little short on time, so I think what I'm going to do is skip ahead to the last playbook. Well, actually, this one's pretty short. So this is a standard playbook that you would run. You say, I want to change all of my my iOS devices to this NTP server. So if I go ahead and run this playbook, then what I'm going to do is grab this command, paste it in here, run it. So this will run this particular playbook, and it's just doing this one task. It's updating the 2223. But what's interesting about this is if I run this, it just adds that NTP server. Really what I wanted it to do was to replace it. And I can verify that by switching in Gluware over to our config audit application. And I can click both these iOS devices that I'm currently running that playbook against and do what we call a capture. And what that does is that goes out to the devices, and you can see it running right here with these little dots. It's going out to the devices and getting what the current config is for that device. This is a snapshot feature of our config drift. And it's going to show, and earlier before the demo, I had taken a snapshot with the golden config of those devices. And now it's showing me that there's a difference. I have this little icon up here that pops up, and it'll show me a difference. And this is the change the Ansible playbook just did in the background while I was clicking around here. And this is what the old device had on it. And this is the new config. And the change it's showing me is it added this 2223 that I asked the Ansible playbook to do. But it also had the old one in there, which isn't my desired effect. It's not exactly what I wanted it to do. And the same with this other device. So I've got a third playbook to fix all this. And I'm going to go ahead and run that while this is being displayed. So
while John's running that drift utility or app gives you the ability to say, what did Ansible do on my network devices? Sometimes when you're running scripts, you're lacking that visibility. And then, you could, using drift, you can see exactly what changed. Using audit, if you have an expected state, you can just audit for the expected state. And if something is not meeting the expected state, it's going to violate your audit. So it's again around drift and audit and the Ansible plugin complementing what you may be doing through Ansible.
So I increased the intelligence of my playbook. This is the second version of that NTT playbook. And I increased the intelligence. I have 5 tasks here now. The first thing I decided, okay, I need to grab the config first. So I'm using this module to grab the config, and I store it in this variable. And in the second task, I'm going, okay, I need to, from this config, basically extract out where the NTP server lines are. So that's what this logic's doing. And then in the third task, I'm taking that logic that I got from the previous task, and I'm saying remove all those NTP servers that I found, because I don't want any of them. I'm going to put my own in. So that's what this particular command is. There's no NTP server and the particular item that I extracted. And then the last one is, okay, now apply the NTP server, but this time instead of a hard-coded value that I had in my previous playbook, grab it from the config that I had, or the information that I had inside of my device that I had managed inside of Gluware. So then it went ahead and it ran that config and it did those changes. So if I go back over here and I click these two items again and click them without highlighting things, and then click the capture again, it'll go back out, start a capture on those devices, and it'll either, if it shows me these double circles where it's unchanged, that means I'm back in line with my reference implementation, which was basically when I captured the original config. It had this NTP server set to that one and this one set to 3.3.3.3. So this one shows me it's back to alignment, and it's back to alignment. If I double click on this, I can go find the NTP server line somewhere in this config. It's probably toward the bottom. Keep going. Yeah, there it is. So yeah, it set it back to this. And the reason I didn't see a diff, because it now matches my golden config. So now it's in a line.